Please remove your aged hands from the countertop, Gran. Individuals like yourself do not depart from this establishment with $4,000 in currency. Officer Brent Maddox did not even attempt to conceal his amusement as he forcibly removed Evelyn Bird's identification from her shaking grasp, lifting it with two gloved fingers as if it were contaminated. You should have simply kept your modest Social Security stipend and remained silent, propelling her toward the exit while patrons gazed on. Now, you're about to comprehend the consequences when people such as yourself feign affluence. Evelyn's gaze remained fixed upon the ground outside, where a formation of heavy footwear, leather vests, and full-face helmets had already pivoted towards the glazed portals, observing every motion as Maddox's grip tightened on her limb. He had not yet comprehended that he was not the sole observer of her plight. Before proceeding, please share your geographical location with us and ensure you are subscribed, as tomorrow's narrative is one you absolutely will not want to miss. The morning sun gently warmed Evelyn Bird's countenance as she disembarked the bus in front of the Stonebrook Federal Bank. Her ailment, arthritis, was exacerbating, transforming each stride with her walking stick into a minor trial. However, the contemplation of her granddaughter's radiant visage fueled her progress. "Nearly there," she murmured to herself, cradling the portfolio of scholarship documentation against her bosom as if it were an invaluable artifact. The bank's transparent doors glided open, ushering her into the chilled air conditioning. Friday mornings typically witness considerable activity, and this day was no exception. A queue of patrons snaked from the teller's windows. Evelyn assumed her position at the rear. "Next client, please," announced a young gentleman with the impeccably white shirt and a name tag identifying him as Ryan Keller. Evelyn advanced, bestowing a cordial smile. "Good morning, young man." Ryan Keller did not reciprocate the smile. His eyes roamed, never quite meeting hers. He appeared recently graduated from academia, with hands that had not yet acquired the assurance of seasoned practice. "How may I assist you?" he inquired, his voice pitched marginally higher than its natural register. "I would like to effect a withdrawal, if you please." Evelyn placed her portfolio down and commenced its opening. $4,000 for my granddaughter's university lodging advance. The deadline is Monday. Ryan's eyebrows ascended. "That is a rather substantial sum of cash." "Indeed, I presume it is," Evelyn acknowledged with a pleasant nod. "Yet my alma mater mandates the lodging advance be remitted in cash or via money order. I have been accumulating funds for this occasion since her birth. I will require to see some form of identification," Ryan stated, his tone shifting subtly. "Certainly." Evelyn reached for her handbag, her digits stiff and unresponsive. She fumbled with the fastening, experiencing a sudden unease beneath his scrutinizing gaze. Her purse was laden with items, prescription vials, tissues, transaction slips, hard candies encased in crinkly plastic. "Kindly grant me a moment. It is somewhere within." Ryan's posture stiffened. He glanced towards his supervisor's chamber, then back at Evelyn's exploratory hands. "Is there an issue?" she queried, finally locating her wallet beneath a packet of tissues. No issue whatsoever," Ryan replied hastily. Too hastily. Evelyn extracted her driver's license and bank card, sliding them across the counter. "Here you are." Ryan retrieved her identification, scrutinizing it for longer than seemed requisite. Subsequently, he tapped something into his computer, frowning at the display. "One moment, Mrs. Bird. I must confirm a detail with my supervisor." Before Evelyn could respond, Ryan was striding briskly towards a glass-enclosed office, where a gentleman in an opulent suit sat reviewing documents. Frank Dillard. She had observed him previously, but had never received direct assistance from him. He was one of those individuals who seem to perceive through people rather than at them. Through the glass she watched their exchange. Ryan leaned in, speaking softly, yet gesturing back in her direction. Frank Dillard looked up past Ryan, directly at Evelyn. There was a quality in that regard which caused her stomach to contract. Not surprise or empathy, but something more frigid, something she had encountered on numerous occasions throughout her 74 years. Frank rose, adjusting his tie, and rejoined Ryan at the counter. "Mrs. Bird," he declared without extending his hand. His voice carried across the bank's atrium. "You are attempting to withdraw $4,000 in cash." Evelyn noticed the turning heads. She maintained a subdued and dignified tone. "Yes, for a deposit. And for what specific reason do individuals such as yourself require such a sum simultaneously?" Frank inquired, making no effort to lower his voice. The words struck like a physical blow. "Individuals such as yourself." She comprehended his implication precisely. "My granddaughter's university mandates." Yes. Frank interrupted her, waving a dismissive hand. Ryan will assist you in verifying your account. We adhere to established protocols for substantial cash transactions. Frank turned away, and Ryan stepped forward once more, not quite meeting her gaze. I will simply need to conduct some supplementary verification on your account, Mrs. Bird. It should not require an extended duration. However, instead of inputting any data into his terminal, Ryan stepped back towards the rear section behind the teller stations. She observed him retrieve a telephone, turning his back to her. Evelyn stood alone at the counter, clutching her portfolio containing her granddaughter's future. The discomfort in her legs had receded into the background, supplanted by a familiar sensation of being rendered invisible. She had toiled her entire existence, 32 years serving sustenance in the school cafeteria, volunteering at church every Sunday, raising her progeny, and assisting with her grandchildren. Now, at 74, she was being treated as a transgressor for endeavoring to access her own funds. She surveyed the bank. Other patrons were being attended to. A young Caucasian couple exchanged laughter with their teller as they deposited a check. An elderly Caucasian gentleman in a business suit was escorted to the loan officer's cubicle, holding a cup of coffee. And here she stood, waiting as she had so many times previously. Through the expansive front windows, she discerned movement in the parking area. 2 patrol vehicles arrived, their lights extinguished but positioned directly before the entrance. Her heart skipped a beat. Surely they were not present for her. Yet deep within she sensed something amiss, profoundly amiss. Frank reappeared from his office, glancing towards the front entrance with an expression that bore a striking resemblance to satisfaction. Ryan remained in the rear, no longer even feigning to process her transaction. Evelyn stood motionless, her knuckles white around the grip of her walking stick. She had committed no transgression. The funds were rightfully hers, accumulated dollar by dollar over many years. All documentation was in order. Her identification was valid. But none of that appeared to hold consequence as the 2 police officers pushed through the main doors, their hands resting casually on their belts near their service weapons. The bank fell into a profound silence as the officers surveyed the room, their gazes swiftly locating Frank Dillard, who inclined his head slightly in Evelyn's direction. She desired to speak, to elucidate, to present them with her portfolio containing all the scholarship documents and the letter from the university regarding the lodging deposit, but her mouth had become parched, and that age-old familiar sensation overwhelmed her, the one that conveyed to her that voicing her concerns would only exacerbate the situation. Thus she remained standing, a 74-year-old matriarch with a chronic ailment and a lifetime of diligent labor behind her, awaiting the unfolding events, oblivious to the fact that outside in the parking lot, a contingent of gentlemen in leather vests had just arrived on rumbling motorcycles, heading towards the ATM situated on the building's flank. The transparent portals of Stone Brook Federal Bank swung open with a whoosh as officers Brent Maddox and Cliff Harland entered. Maddox led the advance, his broad shoulders square and his jaw set firmly. Harland followed 2 paces behind, mirroring his partner's assured posture, yet lacking the inherent swagger. "Which one is it?" Maddox grumbled, surveying the bank. Frank Dillard stepped forward, subtly indicating Evelyn with a slight nod. "That is she, officers." Evelyn felt her heart pounding against her ribs as the 2 Caucasian officers approached. The taller of the 2, Officer Maddox, according to his name badge, possessed cold blue eyes that seemed to penetrate her rather than acknowledge her. The shorter one, Officer Harland, continually scanned the other patrons as if embarrassed to be present. "Ma'am," Maddox stated, his voice amplified sufficiently for all to hear, "we received a report concerning suspicious activity. What precisely are you engaged in here today?" Evelyn straightened her backbone despite the discomfort. "I am merely initiating a withdrawal from my account, officer." "For my granddaughter?" "A withdrawal of what amount?" Maddox interjected, moving closer. $4,000, Evelyn declared, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "It is for a deposit. I have all the necessary documentation right here." She gestured towards the portfolio on the counter. Maddox did not even cast a glance at it. $4,000 in currency. And from whence did an individual such as yourself procure such funds? The insult pricked, but Evelyn had endured worse. "It is my remuneration, officer. I have been accumulating it for years. I was employed at the Westfield Elementary School cafeteria for 32 years. Allow me to examine that identification once more," Maddox demanded, interrupting her yet again. Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she presented her driver's license. Instead of accepting it gently, Maddox snatched it from her grasp. "Harland, take a look at this," he proclaimed, holding the ID aloft. "It does not appear authentic to me." Officer Harland peered at the license and shrugged. It could be counterfeit, he ventured weakly, clearly merely acquiescing. It most certainly is not counterfeit, Evelyn protested, her voice escalating slightly. I have been a patron of this institution for over 40 years. Behind the officers, Frank Dillard stood with his arms crossed, a smug expression on his countenance. He made no move to corroborate Evelyn's identity, despite the fact that she had observed him offer a greeting to her at the bank on numerous prior occasions. If you would kindly verify my account within your system, Evelyn requested of Ryan, who was hovering nervously behind his counter. You will find that everything is in order. Ma'am, we are managing this situation now, Maddox stated curtly. The bank has reason to believe you're attempting to perpetrate fraud. Fraud? Evelyn's voice faltered. That is preposterous. The funds are mine. A few patrons shifted uncomfortably, their gazes darting between the confrontation and their mobile devices or the floor. No one offered a word. Do you possess any other form of identification? Harland inquired, his tone marginally less confrontational than his colleagues. Yes, I have my social security card in my handbag, Evelyn replied, reaching for her satchel. Cease, Maddox commanded, his hand instantly moving towards his sidearm. Maintain your hands within my line of sight. I am merely retrieving my Maddox moved with astonishing alacrity for a man of his stature. He seized Evelyn's arm, the one not supporting her walking stick, and twisted it behind her back. She cried out in agony as her handbag tumbled to the floor, disgorging tissues and medicinal containers across the polished tiles. You're causing me pain, she gasped. Refrain from resisting, Maddox growled, despite her complete lack of resistance. With practiced efficiency, he fastened a handcuff around her wrist, the frigid metal biting into her skin. Her walking stick clattered to the floor as he secured her other wrist, yanking her arms back so forcefully that she feared her shoulder might dislocate. The bank had fallen into absolute silence. Evelyn could discern nothing but her own labored breathing and the rush of blood in her ears. Tears welled in her eyes, not from apprehension, but from the sheer indignity of the entire episode. She had lived through the civil rights era, had witnessed water hoses turned upon individuals, had been subjected to appellations no human being should ever endure, and here she was, 7 decades later, being treated as a criminal for attempting to assist her granddaughter. Evelyn Bird, you are under arrest for attempted bank fraud, and resisting arrest, Maddox proclaimed loudly. I did not resist. I committed no offense, Evelyn protested, her voice breaking. Harland retrieved her walking stick and portfolio, avoiding her gaze as he did so. Maddox gripped her upper arm with sufficient pressure to leave a bruise and began escorting her towards the exit. Her legs, already afflicted by the pain of arthritis, struggled to keep pace with his stride. My handbag, she implored, her voice barely audible. My medication is in my handbag. We will confiscate it as evidence, Maddox responded coldly. Outside, the morning had grown warmer. The sun seemed to mock the somberness of the unfolding events, as Maddox propelled Evelyn across the parking lot towards the waiting patrol car. From the periphery of her vision, Evelyn perceived movement. A group of motorcycles was parked adjacent to the ATM on the building's side, large gleaming machines with riders clad in leather standing beside them. Through her tears she recognized the fiery red beard of the most imposing man, the one they referred to as Big Red, who invariably offered a respectful nod when she passed by on Friday mornings. Occasionally, she would bring them leftover pastries from her church's Thursday evening gathering. Big Red was observing now, his expression transforming from bewilderment to recognition, to something more ominous as he took in the scene before him. The other motorcyclists, she knew some of their peculiar sobriquets, Knuckles, Stitch, and Tinker, were also turning towards the commotion. Please, Evelyn pleaded with Maddox, her voice barely a whisper. This is all a grave error. Save it for the judge, Maddox retorted sharply, pushing her forward once more. Her toe caught on a fissure in the asphalt, causing her to stumble. Maddox roughly pulled her upright, eliciting another cry of pain as it shot through her shoulders. That sound, her cry of agony, seemed to instigate a reaction. From the vicinity of the ATM, heavy footsteps echoed. Evelyn turned her head to witness Big Red striding towards them, his colossal frame moving with surprising decisiveness. His leather vest displayed insignia she had never fully comprehended, but had always regarded with respect. Behind him, the other motorcyclists rose like a formidable wall of leather and denim. Big Red halted directly in their path, his weathered face set in an unyielding expression as he gazed at the officers. His eyes briefly met Evelyn's, a flicker of mutual recognition passing between them before he reverted his steely gaze to Maddox. He remained silent. There was no necessity for words. His presence, standing 6 feet 4 inches tall, exuding tattooed intensity with a fiery red beard, conveyed a powerful message. The other members of the Brotherhood spread out behind him, forming an impassive barrier between the police vehicle and Evelyn. Maddox's grip on Evelyn's arm tightened painfully. She could feel him stiffen, suddenly uncertain as he confronted not a frail grandmother whom he could intimidate, but a force entirely different. Men who harbored no fear of him whatsoever. "Make way," Maddox commanded. However, his voice had lost some of its former assertiveness. "This pertains to police matters." Big Red did not yield. He simply stood there, helmet in hand, his eyes locked onto Maddox, with the composure of an individual who had witnessed an abundance in life to be easily disconcerted. Behind him, engines rumbled as additional motorcycles entered the lot. "Excuse me, officer." Big Red's voice was remarkably placid, almost gentle, yet possessed an undeniable undertone of steel. "Might you enlighten us as to why you're apprehending Miss Evelyn?" Maddox's head snapped upward. His hand instinctively moved towards his firearm, but he restrained himself upon realizing the sheer number of motorcyclists forming a loose semicircle around the patrol car. There were at least 8 of them, towering individuals in leather vests adorned with patches, arms crossed or hands on hips, their faces unreadable behind sunglasses and beards. "This is police business," Maddox declared, but Evelyn could detect a subtle waver in his tone. "Retreat now, or you will join her." Harlan shifted nervously at his side, his gaze flitting between the motorcyclists and his partner. Instead of withdrawing, the motorcyclists advanced a single step in perfect synchrony. They made no physical contact nor issued any threats, merely held their ground. "You see, that is where you err," Big Red stated, removing his sunglasses. "Miss Evelyn occasionally brings us confections. She speaks of her granddaughter. She is a friend," he gestured around. "And we look after our companions." Tinker, a slender motorcyclist with a long gray ponytail, had produced his mobile device and was recording the entire interaction. Other patrons from the bank had congregated at the entrance, and several also had their mobile devices out. "Put that away," Harlan instructed, pointing at Tinker's phone. "Public space. Public servant," Tinker responded calmly. "It is my right." Evelyn stood awkwardly between Maddox and the car door, her wrists throbbing within the handcuffs. She caught sight of Frank Dillard observing from the bank's entryway, his smug expression fading as he comprehended the multitude of witnesses now documenting the scene. "What is she alleged to have done?" Big Red inquired, his eyes fixed on Maddox's. "Because from our vantage point, it appeared as though an elderly lady was attempting to retrieve her own funds from her own bank account." Knuckles, a burly motorcyclist with extensive tattoos on both arms, nodded in agreement. "She has been frequenting this establishment every Friday morning for years, never caused any disturbances." The radio on Maddox's shoulder crackled to life. "Unit 17, this is dispatch. What is your status at Stonebrook Federal?" Maddox hesitated, then grasped the radio. "Situation under control," he replied tersely. "We are receiving multiple calls concerning a confrontation in the parking lot," the dispatcher responded. "Do you require assistance?" Individuals were now assembling on the sidewalk. Vehicles slowed as they passed. Someone from within the bank had evidently contacted the authorities. The dispatcher continued. "The chief has directed us to de-escalate and clear the scene. Repeat, de-escalate and clear." Maddox's face flushed crimson. He glared at the motorcyclists, then at Evelyn, then at the escalating assembly. "This is not concluded," he muttered. Then, more audibly, "Turn around, ma'am." With stiff movements he unlocked Evelyn's handcuffs. She immediately brought her hands forward, rubbing her wrists where angry red marks were already forming. "It appears there has been a misunderstanding," Maddox announced loudly enough for the onlookers to hear. "You are free to depart." Evelyn was rendered speechless. Her throat had constricted with unshed tears. The relief of being released warred with the humiliation of the arrest and the sheer injustice of the entire ordeal. "A misunderstanding," Big Red reiterated, his voice dangerously quiet. "Is that how you characterize placing cuffs on a grandmother without justification?" Stitch, a barrel-chested motorcyclist with a neat gray beard, stepped forward and gently placed his hand beneath Evelyn's elbow. "Are you quite all right, Miss Evelyn?" he inquired softly. She nodded, unable to trust her voice. "Let us escort you back inside to conclude your transaction," Stitch suggested. "We will remain with you." The motorcyclist formed a protective circle around her as they proceeded back towards the bank's entrance. Maddox and Harlan made no attempt to impede them. They retreated to their patrol car, conversing in hushed, irate tones. Frank Dillard stood in the doorway, his countenance a mask of forced pleasantry. "Mrs. Bird," he stated smoothly, I am profoundly regretful for the confusion. If you would accompany me to my office, we can." There was no confusion whatsoever, Big Red interjected. "You summoned law enforcement upon her for withdrawing her own funds." Frank's smile grew strained. "I assure you, it was a misapprehension concerning I simply require my funds," Evelyn stated, finally finding her voice. "The sum of $4,000 from my account for my granddaughter's lodging deposit." Frank hesitated, his gaze shifting between her and the intimidating assembly of motorcyclists. Naturally, immediately. Inside, the bank had fallen into an unnerving quiet. Patrons stared as the unlikely group approached the counter. Evelyn's handbag and walking stick had been retrieved from the floor. The spilled contents had been gathered and returned to her bag. Ryan, the young teller, could not meet her gaze as he counted out the currency. His hands trembled slightly. "Here you are, Mrs. Bird," he stated, pushing the money across the counter. "I sincerely apologize for the events that transpired." Evelyn carefully placed the cash into her wallet, then tucked it deep within her purse. Her own hands were still trembling. The adrenaline was subsiding, leaving her feeling depleted and suddenly very aged. "May we provide you with transportation home, Miss Evelyn?" Big Red inquired as they exited back outside. "I do not believe you should be alone at this juncture." She looked up at him. This colossal gentleman with piercing eyes that somehow conveyed nothing but kindness when they regarded her. "I am uncertain," she replied hesitantly. "I typically utilize public transportation." "There's absolutely no bother," he reassured her. "We were already traveling in that direction." This statement, as both of them knew, was not entirely factual. However, Evelyn felt too unsettled to contest it. The notion of enduring a bus ride, attempting to maintain composure amongst strangers, was simply too daunting. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I truly appreciate that." Big Red gave a nod and gestured towards their waiting motorcycles. "Don't fret, we'll maintain a leisurely pace," he promised with a gentle expression. Knuckles had attached a sidecar to his motorcycle. It's quite possibly the most comfortable seat you'll ever experience. As they walked towards the bikes, Evelyn remained acutely aware of the stares following them. Bank patrons observed from the windows, while the police officers remained seated in their patrol vehicle, Maddox's face a mask of raw fury. Knuckles assisted her into the sidecar, ensuring she was seated comfortably and securely. "Your inaugural motorcycle journey?" he inquired with a broad grin. "Likely my only and final one," Evelyn confessed, managing a faint smile despite the circumstances. "You might reconsider that assessment after this experience," he remarked, handing her an extra helmet. "There's a unique sense of liberation that comes with the open road." As the engines roared to life around her, Evelyn stole one last glance at Officers Maddox and Harlan watching helplessly from their cruiser, their faces contorted with vexation and a discernible hint of future troubles yet to come. But for this present moment, enveloped by her unexpected protectors, Evelyn experienced a sensation she hadn't anticipated, a profound sense of security. The motorcycles departed from the parking lot in a precise formation, whisking her away from the scene of the morning's ordeal and the bank itself. Behind them, the police cruiser remained stationary, its occupants unable to pursue, without exposing the pettiness of their motives to the assembled onlookers. Evelyn's modest residence on Maple Street appeared precisely as she had left it earlier that day. The yellow drapes still swayed gently in the open windows. Her porch swing continued its familiar creak in the late morning breeze. Her garden gnome, with its chipped smile, still presided over its spot beside the front steps. Yet an undeniable shift had occurred. The deep thrum of motorcycle engines shattered the tranquility of her neighborhood as the Hells Angels arrived at her curb in perfect synchronicity. Across the street, Mrs. Parker peered through her blinds, her jaw agape at the sight of her elderly neighbor descending from a motorcycle sidecar aided by a towering, tattooed gentleman. "Thank you," Evelyn expressed as Knuckles helped her maintain her balance. Her legs still felt unsteady, and the stark reality of the morning's events at the bank was beginning to fully register with each passing second. Big Red removed his helmet and gazed up at her neat little house, adorned with its flower boxes and wind chimes. "You have a lovely home, Miss Evelyn. Would you care to come in for some iced tea?" she offered, surprising even herself. "I have some fresh mint from the garden." "I wouldn't want to impose," Big Red responded, though his gaze softened considerably at her invitation. "Please," Evelyn insisted. "I could truly use some company right now." The thought of being left alone with her thoughts had suddenly become intolerable. Big Red nodded to the others. "You gentlemen head on back. Knuckles and I will ensure Miss Evelyn is settled in." The other members of the group acknowledged Evelyn with respectful nods before igniting their engines and departing. Only Big Red and Knuckles remained, accompanying her up the weathered wooden steps to her front porch. Inside, Evelyn's hands trembled as she poured 3 glasses with ice from the freezer. "Allow me to assist with that," Knuckles offered gently, taking the pitcher from her unsteady grasp. "You just take a seat." "I'm not typically this way," Evelyn stated, settling herself onto a kitchen chair. "I'm not sure what's gotten into me." "It's shock," Big Red explained simply, taking a seat opposite her. His formidable physique made the kitchen chair appear minuscule, akin to a child's toy. "What you experienced today was entirely unwarranted." Knuckles placed the glasses of tea on the table and occupied the third chair. Despite his imposing appearance, his arms adorned with tattoos, his leather vest bearing unfamiliar patches, his movements were remarkably careful and considerate within her personal space. "I've never encountered any legal trouble," Evelyn confided, her voice sounding small. "I haven't even received a parking infraction in all my 74 years. "You were not in any trouble today either," Big Red stated firmly. "Those officers were unequivocally in the wrong, plain and simple." Evelyn's gaze fell to the red marks encircling her wrists, where the handcuffs had dug into her skin. "I was merely trying to assist my granddaughter with her college accommodation needs. That's all." Her voice faltered. $4,000? My own funds? That manager had absolutely no authority, Knuckles exclaimed, a flicker of anger crossing his features. "I've been observing that individual for years. He treats people with varying degrees of respect based on their background. Did you notice that as well?" Evelyn inquired. Big Red nodded. "We observe a great deal when we're positioned out there in that parking lot. People tend not to pay us much mind, so we tend to notice things." "Such as?" Evelyn asked, taking a sip of her tea. "For instance, how that fellow at the door rushes to assist certain patrons but makes others wait," Knuckles elaborated. "Or how some individuals are offered refreshments and comfortable seating, while others are subjected to an intense interrogation over minor financial transactions." Evelyn nodded slowly. "I've always sensed it, but I assumed I was perhaps being overly sensitive." "You were not," Big Red assured her. "And what transpired today crossed a significant boundary." "Why did you intervene?" Evelyn asked. "You had no obligation to become involved." Big Red appeared almost sheepish. "Do you recall last Christmas? You brought us those gingerbread cookies when we were collecting for the toy drive." Evelyn offered a faint smile. "I remember you all were freezing out there. And last spring, during that torrential downpour, you came out with that large umbrella for Tinker while he was working on his motorcycle." She nodded. "That's the reason," Big Red stated plainly. "You consistently treat people with kindness, so we reciprocate in kind." Evelyn felt a familiar prickling sensation as tears welled up again. "I simply cannot comprehend their actions towards me today." Big Red and Knuckles exchanged a knowing glance, conveying their understanding of the underlying reasons, though their politeness prevented them from explicitly stating them. "Listen," Big Red said, retrieving a small notepad from his pocket. He scribbled down some information and slid it across the table. "This is my telephone number. Please don't hesitate to contact me any time you require assistance, day or night." Evelyn regarded the paper. "I couldn't possibly impose." "It's not an imposition," Knuckles interrupted gently. "It's about community. And in this neighborhood, you are a part of ours." They remained for an additional 30 minutes, engaging in quiet conversation, ensuring Evelyn had calmed considerably before their departure. Big Red insisted on inspecting her door locks and peering through her windows, as if assessing the property's security. Knuckles inquired if she had any family in the vicinity who might be able to stay with her. "Only my granddaughter, but she's attending college in Durham," Evelyn explained. "I don't wish to trouble her with this matter." As they finally departed, Evelyn stood on her porch, watching their motorcycles recede around the corner. The neighborhood seemed to collectively exhale, returning to its customary state of quietude. "It's concluded now," she reassured herself, re-entering her home. "A regrettable oversight, but it is finished." She spent the subsequent hours attempting to regain her composure. She tended to her plants, folded laundry, and prepared a simple meal that she ultimately couldn't bring herself to consume. Every few minutes she found herself unconsciously rubbing her wrists, the phantom sensation of the handcuffs still feeling unnervingly tight. At 3 o'clock, her telephone rang. Evelyn did not recognize the number, but answered nonetheless. "Mrs. Bird." A young woman's voice, hushed and urgent, emanated from the receiver. "Yes, this is she. My name is Marisol Rivera. I work as a teller at Stonebrook Federal. I witnessed the events that transpired this morning." Evelyn sank heavily onto her couch. "Oh, I see. I'm calling because—" The young woman paused, and Evelyn could hear her taking nervous breaths. "Because I wouldn't be able to rest tonight if I didn't convey the truth to you." "The truth about what, my dear?" Mr. Dillard did not summon the authorities because he suspected you of any wrongdoing, Marisol whispered. He initiated their involvement because he objected to you withdrawing such a substantial amount of cash. Evelyn's heart pounded with painful intensity in her chest. What do you mean by that? After you departed, he was heard laughing about it in his office with Ryan. He stated that he was teaching you a lesson about, Marisol's voice diminished further, about individuals like yourself attempting to withdraw that magnitude of funds in a single transaction. Evelyn's grip tightened on the telephone receiver. I understand. He informed Ryan that you are likely engaged in money laundering for street youth. That's precisely how he referred to them. He claimed you people always assert it's for family purposes, but in reality it's for, Marisol trailed off, unable to complete the sentence. For illicit substances, Evelyn supplied, her voice devoid of emotion. I am profoundly sorry, Mrs. Bird. It was entirely inappropriate. None of it was justifiable. No, Evelyn agreed quietly. It was not. I risk disciplinary action for sharing this information with you, Marisol added. However, my grandmother instilled in me a principle of not remaining silent when an injustice has occurred. Thank you for informing me, Marisol, Evelyn conveyed. Your grandmother raised you with admirable values. After concluding the call, Evelyn remained motionless on the couch, the afternoon sunlight filtering through her curtains, casting elongated shadows across the living room. The house suddenly felt excessively silent, almost vacant. She walked deliberately to her kitchen table and sat down, placing her hands flat on its surface. The contusions on her wrists were deepening, transitioning from an angry crimson to a dark violet hue. So, it wasn't an oversight after all, she whispered to the silent room. The realization settled upon her like a heavy shroud. Not a simple misunderstanding, not an overly zealous employee, not a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a premeditated act. It occurred because of who I am. It happened because Frank Dillard had looked at a 74-year-old black grandmother and perceived something threatening, something criminal, something less than fully human. Outside her window, the drone of a neighbor's lawnmower persisted. A dog barked. A car door slammed shut. The world continued its ordinary course as if nothing significant had transpired, as if her dignity had not been publicly stripped away in front of a gathering of people at a bank, as if she had not been subjected to being handcuffed and nearly forcibly removed for attempting to access her own funds. Evelyn gently touched the bruises, feeling the physical pain beneath her fingertips, tangible evidence of the morning's events, proof that she could neither disregard nor dismiss. The tears she had been suppressing finally cascaded down, silently tracing paths down her cheeks as she sat alone at her kitchen table. Evelyn compelled herself to consume a modest dinner, despite the complete absence of appetite. She moved through her kitchen with familiar, practiced actions, chopping vegetables, stirring broth for her soup, toasting a solitary slice of bread. The comforting routine helped to soothe her frayed nerves, although her thoughts continuously returned to Marisol's phone call. Lord, grant me strength, she whispered to herself, a familiar invocation she had relied upon throughout her life. Just as she lifted the spoon towards her lips, a sharp, resounding crash from outside shattered the prevailing quiet. The metallic impact against the pavement echoed throughout the front of the house. Evelyn froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She carefully set down her spoon and moved with cautious steps towards her front window, parting the curtain just enough to peer outside. In the subdued illumination of the street lamp, she could discern her mailbox lying discarded on the ground, violently torn from its post. A solitary figure, clad in a dark hooded sweatshirt, was sprinting down the street, vanishing around the corner. Oh, gracious heavens, she gasped, her hand instinctively flying to her chest. She hesitated for a moment at her front door before steeling her resolve and opening it. Standing on her porch, she surveyed the extent of the damage. Her robust metal mailbox, the very one her late husband had installed 15 years prior, lay dented and grotesquely twisted on the sidewalk. Its sturdy wooden post had been completely snapped in two, its splinters scattered across her lawn. A neighbor's porch light illuminated. "Evelyn, are you all right over there?" Mrs. Parker called out from across the street. "Someone has damaged my mailbox," Evelyn responded, her voice trembling. "Did you happen to see who it was?" "I merely observed someone fleeing the scene. It appeared to be one of those teenagers from down on Maple." Evelyn retreated inside and reached for her telephone. With fingers still quivering, she dialed the non-emergency police line. A somewhat monotonous voice answered. "Police department." "Yes, hello. I wish to report an act of vandalism to my property," Evelyn explained, striving to maintain a steady tone. "Someone has just destroyed my mailbox. Your address, ma'am?" 412 Willow Street. A brief pause ensued, punctuated by the sound of typing. Your name? Evelyn Bird. Another pause, this one considerably longer. And you stated this incident involved a mailbox. Yes. Someone forcefully detached it from its post. I am a senior citizen. And, ma'am, we can certainly take a report. However, to be candid, incidents of this nature are typically attributed to youthful indiscretions. We are unlikely to achieve a significant resolution. Evelyn frowned. But I observed the individual fleeing the scene. If an officer were to arrive now... We are currently operating with limited staffing this evening, Mrs. Bird. I can arrange for an officer to drive by tomorrow to take your report, if that would be acceptable. The dismissive tone of the dispatcher's voice caused Evelyn's stomach to clench. Yes, please do that. We will endeavor to have someone attend to it tomorrow afternoon. After concluding the call, Evelyn returned to her cooling soup. She ate her meal mechanically, the flavors no longer registering. Her mind raced. Was it truly just an act of youthful mischief? The timing seemed remarkably coincidental, occurring mere hours after her profound humiliation at the bank. She washed her dishes and settled into her living room, attempting to read a book, but her focus remained elusive. Every passing vehicle prompted her to glance towards the window. Shortly after 8 o'clock, a patrol car proceeded slowly past her residence. Even through the thick fabric of the curtains, she recognized Officer Maddox at the wheel. His driving was not typical. He was creeping along, his head turned deliberately towards her home. A chill ran through Evelyn's veins. She extinguished her reading lamp and moved silently to the window, peering cautiously through a minuscule gap in the curtains. The patrol car reached the end of the block, executed a U-turn, and once again drove past her house, this time even more deliberately, slowly. This is not right, she whispered to herself. This is most certainly not right. She double-checked the locks on her doors before retiring early, the sheer exhaustion from the day's stressful events finally overwhelming her. Sleep proved to be restless, punctuated by dreams filled with handcuffs and derisive expressions. A sharp, percussive sound against her front window jolted her awake. Evelyn sat up in bed, her heart pounding erratically. The clock on her bedside table indicated precisely 9:30 in the evening. Another crack, followed by a distinct splattering noise. She hurried to her window and peered out just in time to witness a vehicle accelerating away. Its headlights were off, only the red taillights disappearing down the street. Evelyn made no move to turn on any lights. Instead, she navigated cautiously through her darkened house towards the front door. Upon opening it, an immediate odor assaulted her senses. The acrid, sulfuric stench of broken eggs. Her porch was in a state of disarray. Raw eggs dripped down the front of her door, smeared across her welcome mat, and splattered liberally on the porch railings. At least half a dozen projectiles had been hurled. She closed the door quietly, leaning against it for support. There seemed to be little point in contacting the police again. It had become abundantly clear that they were not inclined to offer her any assistance. Sleep became an impossibility after this final violation. Evelyn remained seated in her darkened living room until the first rays of dawn began to filter through her curtains. She jumped at every external sound. As the morning light finally penetrated the gloom, she opened the front door to assess the damage in the daylight. The egg residue had begun to dry, creating a crusty, yellowish mess all over her porch. And there, affixed prominently to her door with clear tape, was an official-looking notice she had not observed in the darkness. Citation: lawn height violation, it read in bold lettering. City Code 32.4b. Grass exceeding 8 inches. Fine. $150. Officer issuing citation: B. Maddox. Evelyn stared intently at the paper, then at her lawn. It had been mowed just 5 days prior by the neighborhood boy she routinely hired. Its height was nowhere near 8 inches. This is a direct consequence of yesterday's events, she whispered, finally comprehending the retaliatory nature of the act. They are seeking to punish me. She commenced scrubbing the egg residue from her porch with a determination fueled by burgeoning anger rather than abject fear. By the time she concluded her task an hour later, her arms ached, but her porch was, for the most part, clean. Just as she was discarding the dirty water from her bucket, the distinctive rumble of a motorcycle approached. Big Red pulled up to her curb, his imposing motorcycle gleaming under the morning sun. He cut the engine and dismounted, his expression shifting from one of amiable greeting to evident concern as he took in her disheveled appearance. Miss Evelyn, are you quite all right?" Evelyn hesitated for a moment before shaking her head. "No, I don't believe I am." She invited him inside and prepared a fresh pot of coffee. As they sat at her kitchen table, she recounted every detail of the preceding events: Marisol's phone call, the shattered mailbox, the patrol car's suspicious circuit, the egg assault, and the entirely baseless citation. Big Red's countenance grew increasingly grim with each new piece of information. His massive hands tightened around the coffee mug to such an extent that Evelyn genuinely feared it might fracture. "This is far from random," he declared finally. "This is their way of delivering a message." "That is precisely my assessment as well," Evelyn admitted. "But what am I to do? I cannot possibly contend with law enforcement." Big Red set down his mug with a definitive thud. "No, but we can certainly provide you with our watchful presence." He retrieved his mobile phone and initiated a swift call. "Knuckles, assemble the crew. Miss Evelyn is currently facing harassment." "Yes, that particular officer from yesterday." He listened intently for a moment. "Yes, I anticipated your reaction. I am currently at her residence." Within the span of an hour, 4 motorcycles were parked outside Evelyn's house. The riders, Big Red, Knuckles, Stitch, and a woman Evelyn had not previously encountered, Ramona, gathered within her living room. Their leather vests and prominent tattoos appeared somewhat incongruous amidst her floral-patterned upholstery and wall hangings adorned with cross-stitched biblical verses. "We are instituting a rotational surveillance system," Big Red explained. "Someone will be making passes by your residence at hourly intervals. We will be utilizing different motorcycles and different riders, thereby minimizing the likelihood of them quickly discerning our objective." "You are not obligated to undertake this burden," Evelyn protested. "With the utmost respect, ma'am." "We are," Stitch stated firmly. He was the youngest member of the group, possessing kind eyes that stood in stark contrast to his intimidating physical presence. "Those officers are flagrantly abusing their authority, and that is unacceptable. We look out for our own community," Ramona added, her voice possessing a gentle cadence despite her formidable exterior. "And whether you readily acknowledge it or not, you are now a part of our community." As the day progressed, Evelyn observed from her window as various motorcycles cruised past her house at consistent intervals. The neighbors, too, took notice, their curtains twitching up and down the street. Mrs. Parker contacted her once to ascertain Evelyn's well-being, her voice tinged with apprehension regarding the presence of the bikers in the vicinity. By evening, Evelyn felt a sense of security that had been absent since the incident at the bank. The bikers had diligently repaired her mailbox, reattaching it to a new post they had procured from the local hardware store. Stitch had even undertaken the task of mowing her lawn, although it hardly required such attention. As darkness descended, Big Red returned to assume the night watch. He strategically positioned his motorcycle at the very end of Evelyn's street, partially concealed by the enveloping shadows cast by a large oak tree. From her vantage point at the window, Evelyn could discern his silhouette, broad-shouldered and ever vigilant, the motorcycle's engine emitting a soft rumble as he maintained his watchful vigil over her home. The sight elicited a surge of emotion, bringing tears to her eyes, not of fear or sorrow this time, but of profound gratitude, a sentiment she had not experienced since the removal of her handcuffs. She finally felt genuinely protected. Monday morning dawned with golden sunlight streaming through Evelyn's kitchen curtains. She sat at her small wooden table, savoring her tea and attempting to alleviate the persistent ache in her wrists. The events of the past weekend still weighed heavily upon her mind. The mail slot clicked, and a cascade of envelopes dropped onto the floor. Evelyn sighed, set down her mug, and shuffled over to retrieve them. Bills, advertisements, and an official-looking envelope from Stonebrook Federal Bank. Her stomach constricted. With trembling fingers, she opened the envelope and unfolded the crisp letter contained within. "Dear Miss Bird," she read aloud, "we regret to inform you that your account has been flagged for unusual activity and is temporarily frozen pending further review." Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. The room seemed to lurch precariously sideways. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "No, no, no." The telephone rang, startling her. She answered with a trembling, "Hello?" "Miss Evelyn, it's Big Red. Just checking in on you this morning." Evelyn's voice cracked as she relayed the contents of the letter. "They've frozen my account. I won't be able to support my granddaughter." A prolonged silence followed. "We'll be there in 20 minutes, Big Red stated, his voice as hard as tempered steel. Precisely as pledged, the thrum of engines echoed outside Evelyn's residence precisely 20 minutes subsequent. "Permit me to peruse that," Big Red articulated with quietude, accepting the missive. His gaze narrowed as he absorbed the contents. "This is utter nonsense," he vocalized, a growl in his tone. "Complete balderdash. They are deliberately targeting you. Stitch." A man of imposing stature, his beard flecked with silver, his hands remarkably steady, inclined his head. "You must descend there and rectify this predicament. I confess I'm uncertain if I possess the fortitude to confront them again," Evelyn confided. Knuckles, arms folded across his formidable chest, shook his head. "You shall not face them in solitude, Miss Evelyn. Not this juncture. Never again." 40 minutes thereafter, the peculiar convoy reached Stonebrook Federal Bank. Evelyn, arrayed in her finest attire, a skirt suit of lavender hue, adorned with delicate pearl studs, proceeded with her head held high. 4 leather-clad motorcyclists formed a protective cordon around her, their countenances grave, their boots making a solid impression on the asphalt. As they neared the edifice, Frank Dillard materialized at the glass portals, his features suffused with crimson. He emerged forcefully, obstructing the entrance. "Miss Bird, your entry is welcomed, yet these esteemed gentlemen must remain outside." Big Red stepped forward. "We are her retinue." Frank's nostrils flared. "This is a professional establishment. We adhere to established protocols." "It is quite acceptable," Evelyn interjected, her hand gently touching Big Red's arm. "I can manage this portion. You gentlemen remain here, within my line of sight." The motorcyclists exchanged glances, then gave a collective nod. "We shall be right here, observing through those panes," Big Red announced, his voice sufficiently amplified for Frank to apprehend. Tinker concurred, adding, "Every movement, every declaration." Evelyn straightened her posture and followed Frank indoors. The banking hall was largely deserted. A scattering of patrons glanced upward, recognizing her from the preceding Friday's incident. Murmurs accompanied her progress towards the manager's desk. Frank took his seat, adjusting his necktie. "Now, Miss Bird, concerning your financial holdings, what precisely has precipitated their congelation?" Evelyn inquired with directness. Frank's smile was a thin, unconvincing veneer. "Security protocols. We detected an anomaly in withdrawal solicitations." "The sole anomaly was my apprehension for attempting to access my own funds," Evelyn countered. "That was an unfortunate circumstance. However, our fraud detection apparatus has indeed flagged your account." "There is naught I can do," Frank declared with a shrug, a subtle smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Bank regulations. How extensive will the resolution process be?" Evelyn queried, a profound sense of despair engulfing her. "It is challenging to ascertain. It could span days, or it might extend to weeks." Through the transparent barrier, Evelyn observed the motorcyclists maintaining their vigilant watch. Their steadfast presence imbued her with a measure of strength. Glancing sideways, Evelyn discerned Marisol, the young cashier who had initiated the initial contact. She feigned attending to documentation while surreptitiously attentive. "I request to converse with a superior," Evelyn stipulated. "I am the manager, Miss Bird. There is no one beyond myself." Evelyn rose to her feet. "Then I shall address your regional supervisor." Frank's smile disintegrated. "Kindly resume your seat, Miss Bird. Creating a spectacle will not ameliorate your circumstances." Outside, the motorcyclists tensed, their gazes fixed on Frank's hardening visage. "I am not creating a spectacle," Evelyn asserted with clarity. "I am inquiring about my assets, which you are presently withholding pending our comprehensive review." Frank snapped. "Now, if you are finished with this unproductive expenditure of my valuable time—" "Mr. Dillard," a soft voice intervened. Marisol had approached the desk. "Miss Bird has an incoming communication on line 1. Frank scowled. "She may utilize the courtesy telephone." Marisol guided Evelyn towards a telephone station situated towards the rear of the hall. Once beyond the range of audible conversation, she imparted in a hushed tone, "There is no incoming call. I merely required an opportunity to inform you that Frank personally flagged your account this morning. He instituted a fraud alert immediately upon commencing business. I overheard him recounting it with amusement to Ryan." Evelyn's chest constricted. Why would he undertake such an action? He articulated that he was imparting a lesson in deference. Marisol's gaze flickered nervously towards Frank's desk. "I could jeopardize my employment by divulging this information." "Ah, my sincere gratitude, dear," Evelyn whispered. "I shall not forget this kindness." Upon her return to Frank's desk, her eyes blazed with a newfound lucidity. "I shall return," she stated unequivocally, "and I shall not be alone." Outside, the motorcyclists encircled her as she divulged Marisol's intelligence. Their visages darkened with indignation. "This constitutes targeted persecution," Stitch declared. "Blatantly evident." They escorted her towards their vehicles. However, as they prepared to depart, a police cruiser entered the parking area. Officer Maddox emerged, adjusting his accoutrements. "Let us depart," Big Red muttered. No purpose in provoking that adversary today. They proceeded in formation back towards Evelyn's neighborhood. At a traffic signal, Knuckles observed the identical police cruiser trailing them. Upon their divergence, with Evelyn accompanying Big Red, while the others navigated alternate routes home, the cruiser pursued Knuckles. Illuminated beacons appeared in his rear view. Knuckles pulled over, maintaining his hands in plain sight on the handlebars. Officer Maddox approached, his hand resting on his sidearm. Your license and registration. What is the impediment, officer? Knuckles inquired with composure. A defective taillight. Maddox's grin failed to reach his eyes. Knuckles was acutely aware of his taillight's flawless condition, having meticulously inspected all his illumination devices the preceding day. Yet he surrendered his documentation without protest. Maddox deliberately prolonged the issuance of a citation, then leaned in close as he presented it. Refrain from interfering in Stonebrook's affairs, he advised in a low tone. You motorcyclists presume to govern this municipality? You do not. We do. Merely assisting a companion, Knuckles responded equitably. Your associate would be well advised to avoid instigating discord. Maddox tapped his citation book against his palm. On the subsequent occasion, it will transcend a mere citation. Tuesday afternoon, golden sunlight streamed through Evelyn's lace draperies, casting delicate silhouettes upon her dining table. 4 leather-clad motorcyclists were seated somewhat awkwardly in her modest wooden chairs, appearing incongruous amidst her floral placemats and fine china teacups. Commence from the initial point, Miss Evelyn, Big Red instructed gently. Every minute particular is significant. For the ensuing hour, she meticulously recounted each event: the suspicious cashier, Frank's dismissive demeanor, the officer's aggressive conduct, the constricting grip of the handcuffs. She detailed the telephone conversation with Marisol, the act of vandalism, and the prior day's account suspension. Stitch's writing instrument moved with alacrity across his notepad. This is a textbook instance of harassment, he murmured. And discrimination, Knuckles added, his voice a low resonance. Tinker, who had remained taciturn, suddenly evinced attentiveness. You comprehend, he exclaimed, reaching for his mobile device. We possess a greater quantum of evidence than they are aware of. He tapped his screen, then rotated it towards Evelyn. The video depicted her outside the financial institution, restrained by handcuffs, with Officer Maddox guiding her with considerable force towards the patrol vehicle. Our helmet-mounted cameras, Tinker elucidated with a hint of pride. Most of us utilize them for vehicular safety. I captured the entire episode from the moment they escorted you outside. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth as she observed her own image on the diminutive display, small, vulnerable, disempowered. And I possess footage from the interior, Stitch appended. When we escorted you back inside, it provided a clear perspective of Frank's countenance upon realizing our persistent presence. Big Red nodded in thoughtful contemplation. This is advantageous, eminently so. He then addressed Evelyn. Miss Evelyn, have you ever encountered the name Samuel Given? She responded with a negative gesture. A civil rights advocate. He has handled circumstances analogous to yours previously. His offices are situated downtown. Big Red's tone softened. My sibling provided domestic services for his family some years ago. She averred that he was a person of integrity, just a legal practitioner. Evelyn evinced hesitation. I lack the financial resources for such protracted legal battles, Stitch interjected. They typically operate on a contingency basis, signifying that remuneration is contingent upon a favorable outcome. Victory in what? Evelyn inquired. Justice, Knuckles articulated with simplicity. They dedicated the subsequent hour to meticulously compiling a chronological record of events. Stitch affixed a sizable sheet of paper to Evelyn's wall, annotating each incident with precise dates and times. Tinker transferred the video files to Evelyn's antiquated laptop, generating duplicate backups. We require further substantiation, Big Red concluded finally. We must apprehend them in their own discourse. In what manner? Evelyn probed. Knuckles produced a diminutive apparatus from his pocket. Record your telephone exchanges. It is legally permissible in this jurisdiction under a single-party consent provision. This implies that only one participant in the conversation needs to be cognizant of its recording. That individual would be yourself. Evelyn regarded the recording device with a contemplative stare. You intend for me to ensnare them? We intend for you to safeguard yourself, Big Red corrected. Truth does not constitute a snare, Miss Evelyn. Tinker abruptly rose. I shall return within 20 minutes. I possess an item at my domicile that may prove beneficial. While they awaited his return, Stitch assisted Evelyn in familiarizing herself with the operation of the recording device. They engaged in practice calls with each other, learning the protocol for its discreet activation. Contact the institution, Stitch suggested. Inquire about your account once more. Ascertain their response when they are unaware of being recorded. Evelyn's digits trembled as she initiated the dialing sequence. The connection established with customer service, who then transferred her to Frank's administrative office. Ms. Bird. Frank's voice was imbued with a superficial courtesy. As I articulated yesterday, your account remains under evaluation. How prolonged will this procedure necessitate? Evelyn inquired, her voice projecting a resolve that belied her internal apprehension. I require access to my funds. As previously elucidated, our fraud detection mechanism has registered atypical activity. There is naught I can do concerning institutional protocols. Is there any supplementary documentation I can furnish to expedite this process? A discernible pause ensued. Individuals such as yourself would be better served by utilizing check-cashing establishments rather than conventional banking facilities. It entails less administrative burden for all parties. Evelyn's breath hitched. What precisely do you imply by individuals such as yourself? I believe we have concluded our discourse, Miss Bird. The line abruptly terminated. Stitch gave her a celebratory thumbs up. You have captured it all. The individuals such as yourself, remark. Truly invaluable. Tinker returned bearing a laptop and a compact printer. Let us transcribe statements while the recollections are still vivid. They toiled throughout the afternoon. Evelyn contacted Marisol, who consented to provide a written deposition regarding Frank's remarks, albeit with reservations concerning her employment security. Tinker assured her that a discreet meeting could be arranged. By late afternoon, they had amassed an impressive compilation of evidentiary material, video recordings, transcribed telephone conversations, witness testimonies, photographic documentation of Evelyn's bruised wrists, the official bank correspondence, and the spurious citation. Wednesday morning dawned with a sense of clarity that Evelyn had not experienced for several days. She stood before her bathroom mirror, meticulously applying a subtle tint of rose-hued lipstick and securing her silver coiffure with pins embellished with pearl accents. Today was not an occasion for presenting her optimal appearance, but rather for reclaiming her inherent dignity. Someone is approaching Miss Evelyn, Mrs. Parker communicated from the adjacent property. It sounds like a procession of motorcycles. Evelyn smiled as she peered through her window coverings. 4 motorcycles rumbled to a halt before her dwelling, their polished chrome components reflecting the morning luminescence. Big Red dismounted first, removing his helmet and smoothing his beard before approaching her portal. Good morning, Miss Evelyn, he greeted upon her opening the door. Are you prepared? She inclined her head, clutching the binder containing the evidence to her chest, as if it were a protective shield. As prepared as I shall ever be. We have a surprise for you, Knuckles announced, gesturing towards a sleek, dark automobile that was drawing up behind the motorcycles. I surmised you might prefer not to traverse the distance to meet with an attorney on the back of a motorcycle. It is my cousin's vehicle, Stitch clarified. He has graciously permitted us to utilize it for the duration of the day. Evelyn's shoulders relaxed. That is most considerate of you gentlemen. The journey towards the city center occupied 20 minutes. Evelyn occupied the rear seating compartment, the binder resting upon her lap, observing through the window as the motorcyclists formed a protective convoy, encircling them. Pedestrians on the sidewalk paused their perambulations to gaze upon the unusual procession. I never envisioned myself receiving such an escort at my advanced age, Evelyn mused to herself. Big Red, who was riding alongside her window, glanced over and offered a grin. The Given law offices occupied the second floor of a crimson brick edifice situated on Main Street. The understated placard affixed to the window bore the simple inscription, Samuel Given, Attorney at Law, Civil Rights, Employment Discrimination, Police Misconduct. Within, the reception area was modest yet impeccably maintained. Framed newspaper clippings adorned the walls, each a testament to diverse civil rights triumphs. A young woman stationed at the front desk looked up, her eyes widening perceptibly at the sight of Evelyn, flanked by 4 formidable motorcyclists. We have an appointment with Mr. Given, Big Red stated. For Evelyn Bird. The receptionist responded with a warm smile. Indeed, he is anticipating your arrival. Please proceed directly within. Samuel Given rose as they entered, approaching from behind his desk to extend a greeting. He was a distinguished African-American gentleman in his 50s, his hair a blend of salt and pepper, his eyes kind behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He was attired in a crisp navy suit, devoid of a tie, lending him an approachable yet professional air. "Miss Bird," he articulated, encompassing Evelyn's hand within both of his. "I am Samuel Given. Big Red apprised me of some aspects of your predicament when he contacted me yesterday. I am profoundly regretful for the adversities you have endured." His voice conveyed a gentle authority that immediately allayed Evelyn's apprehensions. He guided her towards a comfortable chair, then offered a respectful nod to the motorcyclists. "Gentlemen, my gratitude for escorting Miss Bird to my establishment. You are welcome to remain should such be her desire." "They remain?" Evelyn inquired with firmness. "They represent the sole impetus for my presence here." Given inclined his head and resumed his seat. "Then let us commence. Recount your experience in your own terms." For the third occasion, Evelyn narrated her ordeal. This time her voice was more modulated, her articulation more precise. She detailed the confrontation at the banking institution, the unwarranted application of force, the frozen financial account, and the persistent harassment. Given listened with acute attention, periodically making notations, but predominantly maintaining direct ocular engagement. Upon her conclusion, he gestured towards the binder. "May I?" Evelyn relinquished it. Given perused the meticulously organized evidence, his expression growing increasingly disturbed with each page. When Tinker produced a USB drive containing the helmet camera footage, Given inserted it into his computer and observed in silence. The video unequivocally depicted Evelyn being handled roughly during her handcuffing, her diminutive frame dwarfed by the attending officers. Her expression of discomfort was evident when Maddox applied torque to her arm. "Cease the playback," Given commanded sharply. He removed his spectacles and pressed the bridge of his nose. "This is—" He paused, meticulously selecting his vocabulary. "This represents one of the most unequivocal instances of official malfeasance I have encountered in many years." He replayed segments of the footage, periodically halting to make annotations. "The excessive application of force is incontrovertible, as are the recorded telephone conversations with the bank manager." He shook his head. "Ms. Bird, you possess sufficient grounds for multiple legal claims." "What does that signify precisely?" Evelyn inquired. Given leaned forward, enumerating on his digits. "Unlawful detention, excessive force, financial discrimination, exploitation of the elderly, reprisal." He tapped his pen against his desk. "We are contemplating a civil rights litigation against both the law enforcement agency and the banking institution." "Litigation?" Evelyn's voice quavered. "I merely desire for them to cease their interference. That is precisely the rationale for our institution of proceedings," Given explained with gentleness. "This will not abate until they are held accountable. These entities respond to punitive measures, not appeals to moral conscience." Big Red shifted in his chair. "Inform her about the financial aspect." Given nodded. "I operate on a contingency basis for matters of this nature. That signifies that you incur no expenses unless we achieve a favorable resolution or settlement. In the event of success, I shall receive a portion of the remuneration." "I am indifferent to financial recompense," Evelyn stated with conviction. "It is not solely about monetary gain, Evelyn," Given countered. "It concerns accountability. It pertains to ensuring that your experience is not replicated for any other individual." Evelyn fell into a contemplative silence, weighing his pronouncements. "Would I be required to provide testimony?" she finally inquired. "In a court of law?" "Potentially," Given admitted. "However, with this compelling evidence, particularly the video recordings and audio transcripts, there is a considerable likelihood that they will opt for a settlement prior to the commencement of a trial." Evelyn regarded Big Red, then the other motorcyclists who had steadfastly supported her through this distressing period. Their countenances mirrored the burgeoning resolve she felt within herself. "What is the initial course of action?" she queried. Given offered a smile, the first since their arrival. "Firstly, you shall execute my representation agreement. Subsequently, we shall submit formal grievances to the State Attorney General's office, the Internal Affairs Division of the Police Department, and the Banking Commission." He produced a document and meticulously elucidated each clause. Evelyn listened attentively, posing questions whenever an aspect remained unclear. Ultimately, she accepted the pen he extended. Her signature was executed with steadiness and deliberation. "Today," Given declared, rising to his feet, "we initiate our counter-offensive." The subsequent 3 hours elapsed in a flurry of activity. They proceeded to the State Administrative Building, where Given assisted Evelyn in filing formal complaints with various governmental bodies. The motorcyclist remained steadfastly by her side, a silent, imposing presence that drew considerable attention throughout the edifice. With each official complaint Evelyn endorsed, she experienced a palpable increase in her fortitude and self-assurance. This endeavor had transcended her personal plight. It was now a crusade for righteousness. "You are aware," Stitch commented as they exited the Attorney General's office, "that you are likely the most resilient individual I have encountered, Miss Evelyn." She responded with a soft chuckle. At the venerable age of 74, one ascertains that maintaining silence does not invariably equate to ensuring security. By late afternoon, a pervasive sense of exhaustion began to overtake her. Given observed her fatigue and proposed concluding their endeavors for the day. "We have established a robust foundation," he assured her. "I shall commence drafting the formal lawsuit tomorrow. In the interim, continue to meticulously document any subsequent instances of harassment." Back at Evelyn's residence, the motorcyclist insisted on conducting a thorough inspection of her property before their departure. Tinker rectified a loose step on the porch, while Stitch assisted in transporting groceries procured on their journey home. "We shall continue our patrols," Big Red pledged, "at irregular intervals, ensuring they remain unaware of our surveillance." Evelyn expressed her profound gratitude, a sentiment that transcended verbal articulation. After their departure, she stood in her kitchen, the house once again enveloped in silence. She carefully removed Samuel Given's business card from her purse and affixed it to her refrigerator, securing it with a magnet shaped like a teapot. There it would remain, a tangible reminder that she was no longer isolated. A symbol that asserting one's rights was not merely an option, but an imperative. Evelyn prepared herself a cup of tea and settled into her favored armchair adjacent to the window. For the first time in days, a semblance of tranquility settled upon her spirit. Whatever subsequent challenges arose, she was resolved to confront them with her head held high. Thursday evening had descended upon Evelyn's modest dwelling like a gentle caress. Following her evening repast, she had dedicated several hours to the methodical organization of documentation in preparation for her impending meeting with Attorney Given. The day had been remarkably tranquil. No patrol cruisers had traversed the vicinity. No vitriolic telephone communications had been received. Merely an unadulterated period of repose. At 11:15 post-meridiem, Evelyn commenced her customary nightly ablutions. She cleansed her visage, attended to her dental hygiene, and donned her preferred nightgown crafted from soft blue cotton. Her joints exhibited a degree of discomfort exceeding the norm, attributable to a confluence of accumulated stress and the subtle chill pervading the atmosphere. "Just one final inspection before retiring," she vocalized softly to herself. Evelyn ambled into the parlor, relying on her walking cane for support. She reached for the heavy draperies, her fingers closing around the worn fabric that had graced the window for nearly 2 decades. As she drew them together, her gaze inadvertently alighted upon the deserted thoroughfare beyond. The neighborhood was hushed, residences dark save for the intermittent illumination of porch lights. In the distance she discerned Big Red's motorcycle parked beneath a street lamp, 3 residences down. A reassuring sentinel. A faint smile touched her lips. Those devoted individuals. She could never have envisioned motorcyclists transforming into her benevolent guardians. Yet here they were, maintaining vigil in shifts, ensuring her safety. Evelyn turned away from the window, her sense of security reaffirmed. She extinguished the table lamp, plunging the room into a profound darkness, illuminated solely by the soft luminescence emanating from the hallway. The violent shattering of glass reverberated through the pervasive silence. Evelyn emitted a shriek, instinctively dropping to the floor as a substantial projectile impacted her living room. Fragments of glass rained down upon her carpet and coffee table. The frigid nocturnal air infiltrated through the fractured aperture. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. For a fleeting moment she remained paralyzed, incapable of movement or coherent thought. Then, the ingrained instincts cultivated over decades of raising children in occasionally precarious environs asserted themselves. "Remain down," she implored herself in a whisper. "Merely remain on the floor." She began to crawl towards the hallway, her knees scraping against shards of glass. The Ring doorbell, installed the preceding day at Stitch's earnest insistence, would have concurrently dispatched alerts to both her mobile device and Big Red's. Reaching the hallway, she utilized the wall for leverage to prop herself upright. Her mobile telephone rested upon a side table. With trembling digits, she dialed the emergency services number. A sharp impact shattered Evelyn's window, followed by the terrified tremor in her voice as she relayed the event to the emergency operator. "Someone hurled something through my pane," she explained, her breath catching. "I'm an elderly woman living by myself. Please get here quickly." The dispatcher requested her location, and as Evelyn spoke she detected the approaching clamor of multiple motorcycles. "Ma'am, assistance is en route. Are you in a secure position?" Evelyn confirmed her safety, a wave of relief washing over her as the sound of heavy footsteps echoed on her front porch. "My protectors are here now," she declared, ending the call. She moved slowly towards the entry. Peering through the small glass aperture, she recognized the imposing figure of Big Red, his brow furrowed with concern. "Miss Evelyn," his deep voice boomed from the exterior. "It's Big Red and the fellas. Are you all right inside?" "I'm on my way," she responded, her hands still unsteady as she worked the latches. The instant the portal swung open, Big Red entered, followed by Knuckles and Tinker. They navigated the space with unexpected agility for men of their stature, immediately surveying the scene. "Are you injured?" Big Red inquired, his gaze sweeping over her from head to toe. "No, just startled," Evelyn replied. Her eyes were drawn to the living area where shards of glass glittered under the dim light. "Someone threw something through my window." Knuckles cautiously entered the living room, illuminating it fully. "It appears to be a brick," he stated, stooping to inspect it. "Something is attached to it." He carefully detached a small paper, bound to the brick with coarse string. His expression darkened as he absorbed the message. "What does it convey?" Evelyn asked, though a premonition had already settled within her. Knuckles passed the note to Big Red, who read it aloud. "Cease your investigation, or face consequences." The words settled heavily in the atmosphere. Evelyn felt her resolve falter. Big Red gently guided her to a chair in the kitchen, away from the broken glass. "Tinker, secure the rear of the premises," Big Red commanded. "Knuckles, survey the front yard. I've contacted Stitch. He's en route." The men acted with immediate purpose. Tinker moved toward the back entrance while Knuckles stepped outside to patrol the perimeter. "They're aware," Evelyn murmured, her gaze fixed on the note in Big Red's hand. "They know about the legal action." "We anticipated this possibility," Big Red said softly. "But this," he held up the paper, "this signifies their apprehension. You've put them on edge, Miss Evelyn." Evelyn felt no sense of victory, only dread. These individuals had demonstrated a willingness to progress beyond mere threats, resorting to acts of aggression. Tinker reappeared through the doorway, his face contorted with alarm. "Red, come quickly." Big Red moved towards the rear entrance, Evelyn following despite his gesture to remain put. What she beheld caused her heart to lurch. A vivid orange glow illuminated her backyard. Her small gardening structure, where she stored her implements, planters, and treasured photographs too numerous for her home, was consumed by flames. "No!" she cried out. The fire crackled ferociously, devouring the wooden construction. Embers ascended into the night sky, drifting ominously towards the rear of her dwelling. "Tinker, the water conduit!" Big Red bellowed, already striding towards the shed. "Knuckles, back here immediately!" The roar of Stitch's motorcycle announced his arrival in the driveway. He dismounted swiftly, taking in the scene. Without hesitation, he seized a garden hose coiled near the back veranda and fully opened the valve. The riders collaborated with practiced proficiency. Stitch directed the water stream at the base of the inferno, while Big Red and Knuckles utilized shovels from Evelyn's garden to cast earth onto the blaze. Tinker positioned himself between the shed and the house, repelling any sparks that drifted too close with the damp textile he had retrieved. Evelyn stood transfixed on her rear porch, observing as her personal sanctuary succumbed to the conflagration. The shed housed countless mementos: her late husband's fishing apparatus, her grandchildren's early artwork, photo albums she had intended to bring indoors. In the distance, the wail of sirens grew steadily louder. The bikers battled the fire with grim resolve. Water hissed against the flames. Steam and smoke billowed into the nocturnal atmosphere. Gradually, the fiery luminescence receded, supplanted by smoldering remnants and the acrid scent of burnt timber. The fire was brought under control before it could engulf her residence, but the shed was obliterated. Everything within it was lost. A profound sense of devastation washed over Evelyn. After days of maintaining her composure, of resisting, of exhibiting courage, this ultimate transgression proved too much. Her knees gave way, and she collapsed onto the porch steps, tears streaming freely down her aged face. "Why?" she sobbed, her slender shoulders convulsing. "Why are they inflicting this upon me?" Big Red was at her side instantaneously, his massive arm encircling her, an unexpectedly tender gesture. "Because they are cowardly," he stated, his voice rough with emotion. "Because your defiance has intimidated them. Because they believe they can compel you to yield." Flashing lights illuminated the front of the house as police vehicles arrived. Knuckles went to meet them, articulating the circumstances. "I cannot endure this any longer," Evelyn whispered, her voice barely audible above the din. "I simply desired a tranquil existence." "And Miss Evelyn," Big Red declared, meeting her tear-filled gaze directly. We will not abandon your side again, not for a solitary moment. Stitch approached, his countenance grim beneath his bandana. The authorities require statements. They are classifying this as arson. The subsequent hour passed in a haze. Law enforcement officers collected photographic evidence and recorded testimonies. Fire department personnel confirmed the complete extinguishment of the blaze. Neighbors congregated on the street, observing the aftermath. By 2:30 in the morning, the officials had finally departed. The fractured window was temporarily covered with a sheet of plywood Tinker had procured from his vehicle. The shed stood as a blackened skeletal silhouette against the night sky. Evelyn reclined on her sofa, enveloped in a quilt, too apprehensive to sleep in her bedroom. Her eyes were swollen from weeping, her body weary, but her mind remained agitated. Outside, Big Red sat astride his motorcycle beneath the street lamp. The engine was inactive, yet his presence was undeniable. A sentinel on watch. Knuckles was stationed at her rear entrance while Stitch and Tinker patrolled the perimeter of her property. Through the temporary window covering, Evelyn could discern Big Red's silhouette, steadfast, unyielding, protective. She closed her eyes, finding a modicum of solace in the knowledge that she was not alone. The night extended, quiet, yet no longer serene. Friday morning dawned with stark clarity. The sunrise cast an unforgiving glare upon Evelyn's backyard, revealing the full extent of the damage. What had once been her cherished garden shed was now a charred husk, blackened beams pointing accusingly toward the heavens. Piles of ash and debris marked the locations where precious memories had been stored. Evelyn stood on her back porch, a mug of untouched tea cooling in her hands. She had not slept more than an hour all night. Her eyes were puffy, her shoulders heavy with exhaustion and sorrow. "Miss Evelyn," Stitch appeared beside her, his typically gruff voice softened. "You ought to consume something. I prepared some toast." She nodded absently, her gaze fixed on the devastation. "That shed held all my husband's fishing gear. His favorite hat was in there and my grandchildren's first drawings." Her voice faltered. Stitch placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry." Movement at the fence line drew their attention. Mrs. Geraldine Parker, Evelyn's neighbor for 15 years, stood at the gate, her face etched with concern. Behind her, several other neighbors had gathered. "Evelyn, good heavens, what transpired?" Mrs. Parker called, pushing open the gate without awaiting a response. She hurried across the yard, disregarding the imposing figure of Stitch beside Evelyn. Soon Evelyn's backyard was filled with neighbors. Mr. Ruiz from across the street, the Torres family from 2 doors down, elderly couples who had resided in the neighborhood as long as Evelyn herself, young families who had moved in more recently. "We heard the sirens last night," Mrs. Parker stated, her arm around Evelyn's shoulders. "Then Mary Thompson contacted me, saying there was a fire at your place." "Someone deliberately caused this," Mr. Ruiz remarked, examining the remnants of the shed with discerning eyes. He had worked as a contractor before his retirement. "This was no accident." Evelyn nodded, too weary to withhold the truth any longer. "It's because I filed a complaint against the police and the bank." The words hung in the morning air. Then something unexpected occurred. Instead of retreating, her neighbors drew nearer. "What complaint?" inquired Mrs. Torres, her accent thickening with indignation. "What did they do to you?" The narrative flowed from Evelyn, recounting the humiliating arrest at the bank, the prejudiced treatment, the harassment that followed. As she spoke, more neighbors arrived, passing through the gate and joining the expanding circle around her. The bikers stood respectfully to the side, allowing this communal moment to unfold. "That Officer Maddox arrested my son last year for merely sitting in his car," stated Mr. Washington, an elderly man who rarely spoke at neighborhood gatherings. "Said he looked suspicious. The boy was just waiting for his girlfriend to finish her shift at the grocery." "The bank rejected my loan application 3 times," added Mr. Torres. "No justification. My credit is sound. But Frank Dillard, he always has excuses." One by one, similar accounts emerged. What had begun as neighbors checking on Evelyn transformed into an impromptu community convocation. Big Red observed from the porch steps, a rare smile creasing his weathered features. A stocky, silver-haired gentleman pushed through the throng. Ed Ramsey, who had retired from the Stonebrook Police Department 5 years prior. "Miss Bird," he said, removing his cap. "I worked with Maddox for 3 years before I retired. That man has had 7 complaints filed against him. All of them were suppressed." His gaze was steady and apologetic. "I should have spoken up sooner, but I am speaking now, and I will provide it in writing for you." Reverend Jackson from Evelyn's church arrived, his tall figure parting the crowd like Moses at the Red Sea. "Evelyn," he said, taking her hands in his, "this cannot stand. Not in our community. Not to one of our elders." He surveyed the assembled neighbors. "Church Hall, 6 course this evening. We need to organize." A murmur of assent swept through the gathering. As the neighbors dispersed with promises to return that evening, Mrs. Parker remained, assisting Evelyn inside to rest before the meeting. The bikers continued their vigil, rotating shifts so that someone was always present. "You know," Big Red remarked as Evelyn settled onto her couch for a nap, "I believe we underestimated this neighborhood." Evelyn smiled wearily. "People here have been engaged in quiet struggles their entire lives. They recognize when it's time to voice their concerns." The community hall of Greater Hope Baptist Church buzzed with voices that evening. Every pew was occupied, with people standing along the walls and spilling into the vestibule. Evelyn sat in the front row beside Samuel Given, who had arrived early to make preparations. The Hells Angels entered as a collective, their leather vests and tattoos presenting a stark contrast to the Sunday best worn by many church members. A hush briefly fell. Then Reverend Jackson welcomed them warmly, directing them to seats at the rear. "Brothers and sisters," the Reverend began once everyone had settled, "we are gathered tonight because one of our own has been wronged. But as we have learned, Sister Evelyn's experience is not unique." He invited Evelyn to speak first. She rose slowly, her cane steady against the floor, and faced her community. The words came more easily this time, bolstered by the supportive nods and murmurs of assent from the crowd. When she concluded, others stepped forward to speak. A young Latino man described being shadowed through stores by Officer Harlan. An elderly woman explained how Frank Dillard had questioned the source of her pension checks when she attempted to deposit them. A teenage boy recounted being stopped and searched by Officer Maddox while walking home from basketball practice. The stories continued for over an hour. Samuel Given took meticulous notes, occasionally posing clarifying questions. The expressions of the community members reflected anger, pain, and most importantly, determination. Finally, Samuel stood to address the congregation. "What we are witnessing here is a pattern," he explained, his voice carrying easily through the hall. "Not isolated incidents, but systematic mistreatment of this community. Mrs. Bird's case provides us with a starting point, but each of your testimonies strengthens our position." He looked around the room. "I require volunteers to provide formal statements. With sufficient evidence, we can advocate for a broader investigation." Hands shot up across the room. Samuel's assistant moved through the crowd, gathering contact information from those willing to testify. "This will not be swift or simple," Samuel cautioned. "The system protects its own, but together, with a unified voice, we can demand accountability." From the rear of the room, Big Red stood. His immense frame drew everyone's attention. "The Angels will provide security for anyone who feels unsafe after coming forward," he announced. "No one will threaten this community again." A ripple of approval moved through the crowd. Reverend Jackson called Evelyn forward once more. She made her way slowly to the altar where she had sung in the choir for decades and helped administer communion to generations of worshippers. She looked out at the sea of faces, black families who had resided in Stonebrook for generations, Latino immigrants who had more recently made it their home, the leather-clad bikers who had become unexpected allies, and even a few white residents from the more affluent part of town who had come in solidarity. "I was afraid," Evelyn admitted, her voice steady despite her fatigue. "When they placed those restraints on me, I felt so insignificant. When they vandalized my home, I wanted to surrender." She straightened her shoulders. "But I am not insignificant. We are not insignificant. Together we are formidable." A chorus of Amen rose from the congregation. "Miss Evelyn will not stand alone," Reverend Jackson declared, taking her hand. "Who stands with her?" The entire room rose as one, a forest of raised hands and resolute visages. For the first time since the nightmare began, Evelyn felt the burden lifting from her shoulders. The path ahead would be challenging, but she would not traverse it by herself. The community that had quietly endured for so long had discovered its voice and its fortitude. Saturday morning arrived with Evelyn's newly repaired window. The glass company had arrived early, working swiftly to replace what the projectile had shattered. Now her living room was transformed into an impromptu command center. Samuel Given spread files across her dining table, his suit jacket draped over a chair. 3 laptops hummed, surrounded by stacks of legal pads and folders. Evelyn sat in her armchair, a cup of tea cooling beside her, as she observed the activity with quiet resolve. The bikers had arrived promptly at 8 o'clock, filing in respectfully and occupying positions around the room. Big Red stood near the window, occasionally glancing outside at the tranquil street. Knuckles sat cross-legged on the floor, organizing printed testimonies into neat piles. Stitch had brought coffee and pastries for everyone, now arranged on the kitchen counter. "The timing is crucial," Samuel explained, gesturing to a calendar. "We will submit the civil rights lawsuit on Monday morning. That allows us the weekend to finalize everything." Evelyn nodded, her posture more upright than it had been all week. "What do you require from me today, Mr. Given?" "Your official statement recorded and notarized." He indicated a small video camera positioned on a tripod. "Every detail you can recall from the moment you entered that bank until now." Tinker approached with his laptop. "I have the helmet cam footage ready for transfer. You won't believe how clear it is." He turned the screen towards Samuel, who let out a low whistle. "Perfect angle of the arrest," Samuel muttered, adjusting his spectacles. "It clearly depicts the excessive force." Mrs. Us. Parker arrived with a plate of sandwiches, slipping in through the back door as naturally as if she resided there. She had appointed herself Evelyn's unofficial caretaker since the fire. "You need to eat," she told Evelyn firmly. "You cannot contend with the authorities on an empty stomach." Samuel's assistant, a young woman named Janelle, began setting up a makeshift recording station in the corner of the living room. "Mrs. Bird, whenever you are prepared, we will commence your statement." Evelyn smoothed her dress and took a deep inhalation. "I am ready now." The room quieted as Janelle positioned the camera. Samuel sat opposite Evelyn with a legal pad. "Kindly state your name and address for the record," he began gently. "Evelyn Marie Bird, 1423 Maple Street, Stonebrook." "Mrs. Bird, please recount in your own words what transpired last Friday at Stonebrook Federal Bank." Evelyn's voice was steady as she narrated every particular. The suspicious glances from Ryan Keller, Frank Dillard's dismissive demeanor, the rough handling by Officers Maddox and Harlan. She described the discomfort of the restraints, the humiliation of being escorted out in full view of everyone. And since that day, "What has occurred?" Samuel prompted. She detailed the vandalism, the conflagration, the threats. As she spoke, her voice gained strength. The bikers listened silently, their expressions hardening with each new revelation. "Thank you, Mrs. Bird," Samuel said when she concluded. "Your testimony is compelling and articulate." A knock at the door interrupted them. Big Red moved to answer it, one hand hovering near his belt. Ed Ramsey stood on the porch with a thick manila envelope. "I have brought what I pledged," he stated, stepping inside. "Personnel records I retained copies of prior to my retirement. It illustrates the pattern of complaints against Maddox dating back 5 years." Samuel accepted the envelope with raised eyebrows. "This could be crucial evidence." "Mr. Ramsey should have done so years ago," Ed said gruffly. "Better late than never." Throughout the morning, a steady stream of neighbors arrived, some to provide statements, others to deliver food, or simply to check on Evelyn. Janelle recorded each testimony methodically, while Knuckles and Stitch assisted elderly neighbors in completing written statement forms. Mr. Tarn Torres brought his teenage son Miguel to translate for Spanish-speaking residents who wished to contribute their experiences. The boy worked diligently, carefully converting their words into precise English for Samuel's records. "We are constructing more than a legal case," Samuel observed quietly to Evelyn. "We are documenting a community's struggle." Around noon, Tinker burst through the front door, his face flushed. "They are initiating actions," he announced. "Frank Dillard is at the Wilsons' residence down the street." Samuel frowned. "The Wilsons provided statements last night." "He is attempting to coerce them into retracting their statements," Tinker confirmed, offering to review their mortgage situation if they clarified their previous testimony. Big Red started towards the door, but Evelyn raised her hand. "Wait, let me contact Reverend Jackson first." Within 20 minutes, 5 church elders had gathered outside the Wilsons' home. They remained silent, simply standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed, observing. Frank Dillard emerged shortly thereafter, his face flushed with frustration. He entered his Mercedes and sped away. Meanwhile, across town, Officer Maddox was encountering his own difficulties. He had approached Marisol Rivera at the grocery store, cornering her near the produce section. "You should consider carefully the repercussions of providing false information about a bank manager," he told her, standing too close. "Immigration is scrutinizing everyone these days." But he had failed to notice the 3 Hells Angels members who had been following him since morning. Stitch stepped forward. "Phone recording initiated," he stated. "Problem, officer?" he inquired, loudly, drawing the attention of other shoppers. Maddox retreated, muttering about routine inquiries. By mid-afternoon, the news had spread through Stonebrook's neighborhoods. Anyone approached by police or bank officials was instructed to dial a designated number immediately. The community had coalesced into a vigilant shield. Harvey Collins, a veteran of the Vietnam War residing 3 houses away from Evelyn, positioned his vehicle directly before her residence and remained steadfast. Initiating the first security detail, he declared, a container of hot coffee in one hand. "Sir, we have this situation under control," Knuckles reassured him. "No disrespect intended to you, gentlemen," Harvey responded, settling back in his driver's seat. "However, I've been safeguarding this street since long before your births." Inside, Samuel and Janelle diligently continued their work, recording accounts. Tinker had duplicated the helmet camera recordings onto numerous portable storage devices and uploaded them to various online platforms for secure preservation. "We must prepare for the media," Samuel informed Evelyn. "Once we submit our filing on Monday, the press will be all over this. Are you ready for that intensity?" Evelyn contemplated the query. A week prior, the prospect would have filled her with dread. Now she affirmed with a resolute nod. "If recounting my experience can assist others, then yes, I am prepared." As dusk settled, the assembled group gradually dispersed. Samuel gathered his case files, pledging to return on Sunday afternoon for final arrangements. The motorcycle enthusiasts initiated their established watch schedule, with Big Red undertaking the initial night patrol. Evelyn moved through her dwelling, tidying cushions and cleansing teacups, her movements measured and tranquil. The apprehension that had incapacitated her earlier in the week had transmuted into something entirely different, a quiet fortitude that stabilized her hands and bolstered her posture. In her private chamber, she retrieved a framed image from her vanity. James Bird gazed back at her, his military attire immaculate, his countenance filled with pride. Her husband had been gone for 15 years, yet she still conversed with him each night. She placed the photograph on her bedside table, adjusting its angle so his likeness was illuminated by the lamp. "We are fighting back, James," she whispered, tracing the frame with her fingertip. "I am no longer afraid." Outside, the low thrum of Big Red's motorcycle, as he patrolled the perimeter, was audible. Within, the house possessed a distinct atmosphere, not solely due to the day's events, but because a profound transformation had occurred within its very essence. For the first time in years, Evelyn's abode was more than a sanctuary of memories and placid routines. It had become a bulwark of defiance. Monday morning dawned with a gentle precipitation, cleansing the thoroughfares as if preparing the town for the impending events. Evelyn stood before her looking-glass, meticulously arranging her silver tresses. She had selected her most elegant attire for church, a deep blue ensemble accented with white trim, and her favored footwear, despite their slight discomfort. Her fingers exhibited a subtle tremor, yet it stemmed not from fear. This was the day she had long awaited. The growing roar of motorcycle engines resonated outside her window. Through the draperies, she observed the arrival of the Hells Angels, one by one, their machines lined up in precise formation along the curb. Today they had exchanged their customary leather vests for pristine black motorcycle jackets, their vehicles gleaming from a recent polish. The doorbell chimed. Mrs. Parker stood on the stoop, attired in her finest Sunday attire. "Prepared to make history, Evelyn?" she inquired with a smile. Evelyn nodded, gathering her handbag. "More than ready." Outside, the street had undergone a remarkable transformation. A gathering of at least 30 individuals was present, parishioners, neighbors, and former patrons of the diner where Evelyn had dedicated decades of her working life. Ed Ramsey stood alongside his retired police cruiser, now a civilian vehicle, yet still exuding an air of authority. Harvey Collins and 3 fellow veterans formed a loose guard of honor. Big Red approached, extending his arm with formal gravity. "Your carriage awaits, Miss Evelyn." Instead of motorcycles, the assembled bikers had arranged for a black sports utility vehicle. "We cannot have you getting caught in the rain today," Knuckles explained, opening the passenger door. The convoy proceeding to the courthouse was an unprecedented spectacle for Stonebrook. The SUV led the way, followed by a phalanx of motorcycles, then a procession of automobiles stretching for several blocks. As they traversed the town, onlookers emerged from shops to witness the event. Some offered waves, while others merely observed. Upon reaching the courthouse steps, the rain had subsided to a fine mist. Samuel Given was already present at the entrance, his briefcase in hand, his demeanor composed yet resolute. Beside him stood Janelle, clutching a collection of folders. "Quite the grand entrance, Mrs. Bird," Samuel remarked with a smile. "Are you prepared?" "I have been ready my entire life," Evelyn responded, drawing herself to her full height. The bikers formed a protective escort as they ascended the courthouse steps. The community supporters created a human corridor behind them. Photographers from the local Gazette captured images, and Evelyn noted a television news vehicle parked across the street. The polished marble corridors of the county courthouse amplified the sound of their footsteps. Unlike the police precinct or the financial institution, this edifice felt imbued with solemnity, almost sacred in its promise of justice. Evelyn had never before set foot inside a courtroom. Courtroom number 3 was already beginning to fill with onlookers. Frank Dillard occupied a seat at the defense table alongside the bank's legal counsel, a woman with sharp features adorned in an expensive suit. Officer Maddox and Officer Harland were seated at an adjacent table with the police department's legal representative, a balding gentleman who repeatedly consulted his timepiece. Evelyn took her designated place beside Samuel at the plaintiff's table. The assembled bikers and community members filled the spectator gallery behind them, forming an unyielding phalanx of support that visibly unnerved Maddox. "All rise," the bailiff announced. "The court is now in session, the Honorable Judge William Thornton presiding." Judge Thornton, an elderly Caucasian gentleman with penetrating eyes and a reputation for impartiality, surveyed the crowded chamber with a slight furrow in his brow. "I observe we have a considerable assembly present today," he commented. "Let me be unequivocal. I expect decorum in my courtroom. This is not a sporting contest." He briefly reviewed the court's agenda. Bird versus Stone Brook Federal Bank and Stone Brook Police Department. Counselors, are you prepared to proceed? "Yes, Your Honor," Samuel Rose confirmed. The defense attorneys likewise affirmed their readiness. "Mr. Given, please present your opening statement," the judge instructed. Samuel proceeded to the center of the courtroom, his bearing erect, his voice clear and modulated. "Your Honor, this case transcends a singular occurrence or an isolated individual. It represents a pattern of conduct that has been permitted to permeate our community," he continued. Mrs. Evelyn Bird, a respected 74-year-old grandmother and lifelong resident of Stonebrook, ventured to her bank to retrieve funds for her granddaughter's higher education. What should have been a straightforward transaction devolved into a harrowing ordeal of discrimination, an unjust arrest, and subsequent reprisal. Samuel meticulously articulated the charges: racial discrimination within the bank, wrongful apprehension by the police, elder mistreatment, intimidation, and financial endangerment. He elucidated how each accusation was substantiated by robust evidence, including video recordings, audio evidence, and corroborating testimony from numerous individuals. "We will establish that Mrs. Bird not only endured mistreatment, but that this mistreatment was indicative of a pervasive pattern of systemic prejudice that has impacted a multitude of our fellow citizens. We seek not merely restitution for Mrs. Bird, but also accountability and fundamental structural adjustments to preclude such transgressions in the future." The bank's counsel, Miss Hartwell, countered with assertions regarding standard security protocols and reasonable suspicion. The police department's legal advocate, Mr. Donovan, emphasized the split-second judgments officers are compelled to make in potentially volatile circumstances. Judge Thornton listened impassively before turning his attention to Samuel. "Call your first witness." The plaintiff calls Mrs. Evelyn Bird. Evelyn walked to the witness stand with dignified steps, placed her hand upon the Holy Bible, and took the oath to attest to the truth. From this elevated vantage point she could perceive every individual in the courtroom: the stern judge, the visibly anxious defendants, and the rows of her supporters arrayed behind her. Samuel guided her through her testimony with gentle yet thorough questioning. Evelyn recounted the events at the bank in precise detail: the suspicious glances, the hushed telephone conversation, the arrival of law enforcement officers, and the profound humiliation of being handcuffed. "And what transpired after your release?" Samuel inquired. "They commenced pursuing me," Evelyn replied, her voice unwavering. "My mailbox was vandalized, my porch was defaced with eggs. They imposed a freeze on my bank account." She paused, her voice faltering slightly. "Then someone set fire to my garden shed. A note was left instructing me to abandon this legal action." The judge's expression grew somber. "Do you possess evidence directly linking these acts to the defendants?" "Yes, Your Honor," Samuel interjected. "We shall present that evidence shortly." Following Evelyn's testimony, Samuel summoned Marisol Rivera to the stand. The young bank teller approached with evident apprehension, her gaze flickering towards Frank Dillard, who regarded her with an open glare. "Ms. Rivera, kindly recount for the court what you observed at Stonebrook Federal Bank on the day in question," Samuel prompted. Marisol drew a deep breath. "Mr. Dillard, the branch manager." He noticed Mrs. Bird and immediately made a disapproving face. When the teller informed him of the withdrawal, he remarked, "Why does one of these welfare grannies need that amount of cash?" He then quietly instructed Ryan to contact the police, suspecting they were engaged in some sort of fraudulent scheme. "Objection," Miss Hartwell declared, rising from her seat. "Hearsay. Your Honor, Miss Rivera was present and directly overheard these statements in her capacity as an employee," Samuel contended. The judge ruled. Overruled. The court will permit the testimony to continue. Ms. Rivera proceeded to describe how Frank had made comparable remarks about other African-American patrons, particularly those making substantial withdrawals. He instructed us to always meticulously verify their identification, yet he never extended such scrutiny to Caucasian customers. Next, the video evidence was presented. Samuel played the footage from Tinker's helmet camera, which captured the arrest from an unobstructed perspective. A palpable silence descended upon the courtroom as they watched Officers Maddox and Harron roughly apply handcuffs to Evelyn, disregard her explanations, and escort her toward a patrol vehicle. Frank Dillard was called to testify. Under Samuel's cross-examination, he became increasingly defensive, offering contradictory accounts regarding security concerns that diverged from his earlier statements. When pressed about his differential treatment of customers, he retorted, "Certain individuals inherently raise more red flags than others." "And what specific flags did Mrs. Bird raise?" Samuel inquired. Frank hesitated. "It was merely a feeling." "A feeling predicated upon what, Mr. Dillard?" "Experience," Frank stated stiffly. "Experience with elderly African-American women, specifically." By the time Officer Maddox took the stand, the tension in the courtroom had become almost unbearable. Samuel systematically guided him through his actions that day, contrasting them with established police procedures. When confronted with evidence of retaliatory behavior, Maddox's composure faltered. "Look, we have protocols for suspicious activities. They may not appear flattering on camera, but I was executing my duty." "And was it also your duty to repeatedly drive past Mrs. Bird's residence to issue spurious citations?" Samuel pressed. "I patrol where I am needed," Maddox snapped, "and certain neighborhoods require more attention than others." "Neighborhoods such as Mrs. Bird's?" Samuel asked quietly. "Those individuals," Maddox began, then caught himself. "That area has presented challenges." "What individuals, Officer Maddox?" Samuel inquired, his voice perfectly even. Maddox's face flushed. "I did not intend any particular meaning by that." The proceedings continued with witness after witness. Community members recounted analogous experiences. Former law enforcement officers spoke about the department's informal operational guidelines. Financial experts corroborated that Mrs. Bird's transaction should never have triggered suspicion. As the afternoon progressed, even Judge Thornton's composed demeanor showed subtle indications of concern. He interjected periodically with pointed inquiries that suggested his disquietude regarding the emerging pattern. By 4 o'clock, both parties had concluded their presentation of evidence. Samuel's closing argument was concise, yet impactful, highlighting not only the harm inflicted upon Evelyn, but also the broader ramifications for the entire community. "Your Honor," he concluded, "what transpired with Mrs. Bird was neither an error nor a misinterpretation. It was the inevitable consequence of deeply ingrained prejudice that has been allowed to operate without restraint. We implore not merely for financial compensation, but for a reckoning and a transformation." Judge Thornton removed his spectacles, massaging the bridge of his nose. The courtroom maintained a profound silence, awaiting his pronouncement. "I have received substantial testimony today that necessitates careful deliberation," he announced finally. "I shall render my decision tomorrow morning. All parties are to return to this courtroom precisely at 9 o'clock a.m., he declared, striking his gavel. "Court is adjourned." As attendees began to depart, Evelyn remained seated, her hands clasped in her lap. She felt an unusual sense of calm, as if a considerable burden had been lifted from her shoulders. Irrespective of the outcome tomorrow, she had articulated her truth in a forum where it was imperative to be heard. Big Red approached, extending his arm. "You conducted yourself admirably, Miss Evelyn." "Exceptionally well." She offered a faint smile as she rose steadily to her feet. "We all did, Red. We all did." The courthouse was already thronged by 8:30 on Tuesday morning. Individuals crowded onto the wooden benches, their hushed conversations filling the room with an palpable sense of anticipation. Evelyn was seated at the plaintiff's table, attired in her finest navy dress, the one she typically reserved for Easter Sunday. Her fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted her handbag on her lap. Big Red, clad in a crisp button-down shirt that stretched taut across his broad shoulders, sat beside her. His signature leather vest remained visible beneath the shirt. He was unwilling to entirely forsake his identity, even for the proceedings. Noticing Evelyn's shaking hands, he reached over and offered his open palm. She placed her small hand within his immense one and gripped it firmly. "Whatever transpires," he murmured, "you have already triumphed by standing your ground." Evelyn nodded but found herself unable to speak. After decades of keeping her head down, of remaining inconspicuous, of suppressing injustice with a polite smile, this moment felt almost surreal. The community filled the seats behind her. Church members, neighbors, former colleagues from the school cafeteria, and, of course, the bikers, who occupied the rear row like a leather-clad bastion of solidarity. Frank Dillard sat at the defense table, a smug expression on his face, whispering to his attorney. Officer Maddox's jaw was clenched tightly, his gaze fixed resolutely forward, while Officer Harlan nervously fidgeted with his tie. Precisely at 9 o'clock a.m., the bailiff called the court to order. "All rise for the Honorable Judge William Thornton." Everyone stood as Judge Thornton entered, his black robes flowing behind him. His expression conveyed nothing as he settled into his chair and arranged his documents. "You may be seated," he stated, his voice resonating through the hushed courtroom. "Following my review of all testimony and evidence presented yesterday, I am prepared to deliver my ruling in the matter of Byrd versus Stonebrook Federal Bank and the Stonebrook Police Department." The judge directed his gaze specifically at Evelyn, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Mrs. Byrd, I wish to express my gratitude for your courage in bringing this matter before the court. It is no simple feat to confront powerful institutions, particularly at your stage of life." Evelyn straightened her posture, an aura of dignity emanating from her despite her palpable nervousness. Judge Thornton continued, "This court has been presented with overwhelming evidence of discriminatory practices, abuses of authority, and retaliatory actions that have absolutely no place within our system of justice, or indeed within our community." Frank Dillard's smug countenance began to falter. Maddox shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "The evidence clearly demonstrates that Mrs. Byrd was targeted due to her racial background, subjected to humiliation and physical distress during an unwarranted arrest, and subsequently endured calculated retaliation when she sought redress. The helmet camera footage alone provides irrefutable confirmation of the officer's misconduct. Furthermore, the testimony provided by bank employees has substantiated a pattern of racial discrimination at Stonebrook Federal that is both deeply disturbing and unequivocally illegal." The judge paused, peering over his spectacles at the defendants. What is perhaps most unsettling is not merely the initial incident, but the coordinated endeavor to intimidate Mrs. Byrd into withdrawing her complaint, an effort that escalated to encompass property damage and threats of violence. Evelyn's grip on Big Red's hand tightened. The room was utterly silent. "Therefore," Judge Thornton declared, "I am ruling in favor of the plaintiff on all counts." He then consulted his papers. "The court hereby mandates the following remedies. First, Stonebrook Federal Bank and the Stonebrook Police Department are jointly ordered to compensate Mrs. Evelyn Byrd with compensatory damages in the sum of $1,500,000 for emotional distress, civil rights violations, and all associated damages." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Evelyn's free hand instinctively flew to her mouth. Second, Frank Dillard is to be dismissed from his position at Stonebrook Federal Bank, effective immediately, and is barred from holding any management positions within financial institutions for a period of no less than 7 years. Frank's face turned ashen. His attorney placed a restraining hand on his arm. Third, Officers Maddox and Harlan are suspended without pay, pending a federal civil rights investigation into their conduct. I am recommending their permanent removal from the force. Maddox's expression contorted with rage, but Harlan simply slumped in his seat, staring at the table. Fourth, I am ordering a state-level inquiry into the operational practices of the Stonebrook Police Department, including a thorough review of all complaints lodged against its officers within the past 5 years. The police chief, seated in the gallery, briefly closed his eyes, his face etched with gravity. Fifth, Stonebrook Federal Bank is to be fined $250,000 for its discriminatory practices and is mandated to implement comprehensive anti-bias training for all employees, with the outcomes to be assessed quarterly by an independent monitor. The judge then set aside his papers and addressed the entire courtroom. Let this ruling serve as a stark reminder that justice is not an exclusive privilege reserved for the powerful or the affluent. It is the inherent right of every citizen, irrespective of their age, race, or social standing. This court will absolutely not tolerate the egregious abuse of authority or any form of discrimination. He struck his gavel with decisive force. So ordered. Court is adjourned. For a fleeting moment, the courtroom remained suspended in a state of stunned silence. Then, as if an invisible dam had shattered, applause erupted. People rose to their feet, cheering and embracing one another. The bikers in the back, mindful of courtroom decorum, offered approving nods, although Tinker allowed a quiet yes to escape his lips. Tears streamed down Evelyn's cheeks. Big Red gently squeezed her hand, his own eyes suspiciously moist. Samuel turned to her with a broad smile, formally shaking her hand before succumbing to the moment and embracing her. "We achieved it, Mrs. Bird," he said. "You achieved it." Evelyn could barely articulate through her tears. "All these years," she managed, "all these years of remaining silent." Big Red assisted her in rising as reporters began to surge forward, held back only by the bailiff. Frank Dillard stormed out of the courtroom, his attorney hurrying to keep pace. Officer Maddox stood rigidly with palpable fury, while Harlan appeared to have aged a decade in the preceding hour. "Let's get you outside," Big Red said protectively. "Let's get you some fresh air." The bikers formed a loose guard of honor, escorting Evelyn through the throng. Individuals reached out to touch her shoulder, offering their congratulations. Mrs. Geraldine Parker from next door embraced her, both women weeping in shared emotion. As they emerged onto the courthouse steps, the brilliant morning sun felt profoundly symbolic. Indeed, a new day had dawned. Reporters clustered at the base of the steps, their cameras flashing incessantly. Evelyn paused, momentarily overwhelmed by the intense scrutiny. "You are not obligated to speak with them if you prefer not to," Big Red assured her, but Evelyn straightened her shoulders. "No, I believe I should say something." Samuel stepped forward to address the assembled press. "Mrs. Bird will deliver a brief statement. Kindly demonstrate respect. She has undergone a considerable journey to reach this juncture." The reporters fell silent as Evelyn approached the hastily erected microphones. A loyal assembly rallied behind Evelyn, a diverse contingent comprising her fellow congregants, local residents, and even a formidable phalanx of motorcyclists positioned like vigilant guardians. "Standing before a judge was never my aspiration," Evelyn commenced, her tone measured yet resolute. "My sole aim was to facilitate my granddaughter's pursuit of higher education. However, the moment those restraints were clasped around my wrists, a fundamental shift occurred within me. It wasn't merely my spirit that faltered, but the ingrained inclination to remain silent." She inhaled deeply. "This triumph transcends my individual circumstances. It represents a victory for every soul who has harbored apprehension in voicing their convictions, for every individual instructed to acquiesce to societal expectations." Her voice gained momentum. "Today the legal system has affirmed, my rightful position is here, recognized as an equal under the jurisdiction, worthy of deference, and possessing the courage to insist upon it." A fresh wave of acclaim surged from the throng supporting her. Big Red remained unwavering at her flank, his solid presence a poignant testament to the unexpected coalition that had paved the way for this pivotal juncture. Amidst the rapid succession of camera flashes and the clamor of journalists posing inquiries, Evelyn experienced an unprecedented sense of liberation, a feeling absent for a considerable period. The physical marks on her forearms had long since vanished. Yet it was only at this precise moment that the more profound injury began its recovery, the kind that stemmed from numerous years of suppressed self-respect. I sincerely hope you found that narrative engaging. Kindly show your appreciation by liking this video and subscribing to ensure you don't miss any future installments. In the interim, I have personally selected 2 additional narratives that I believe will resonate with you. Wishing you a most excellent day.